To tell you the truth, had I been alone and had there been no witnesses, I should, I think, have been fearful of mentioning the dimensions of this flower, so much does it exceed every flower I have seen or heard of. Joseph Arnold was in awe of what he had discovered, an enormous flower which would come to be known as the Rafflesia. Life begins for this plant as a bud which bursts through the host plant's bark. As buds, they are highly sought after as they're harvested and sold. It was the turn of the century, the year 2000, and Wizards of the Coast was at the helm of the Pokémon Trading Card Game, still a budding entry into the trading card game phenomenon. In their newest set of cards, they would print onto one particular card the words which would go on to be infamous in the decades to follow. No trainer cards can be played. This statement is abrupt. There is a power conveyed in its brevity, a declaration that is at once simple to comprehend, but difficult to fully realize the consequences. In the early days of the Pokémon Trading Card Game, the card design of course had no previous examples against which to measure. Trainer cards in particular, which would be absurd by today's standards, were par for the course in the early days. Supporter cards did not exist, and all trainer cards could be played just as item cards are today. You could play as many trainer cards as you had in your hand, and these cards were incredibly powerful. It is relatively common knowledge amongst seasoned players that despite the popularity of Charizard, the most powerful deck in the early days was the infamous Haymaker deck, comprised of just a few powerful Pokemon which could consistently set up and start taking KOs, leveraging the variety of trainer cards available to them. So, what should happen then if a card came forward threatening trainer cards, one of the foundations of the game? In the year 2000, the Pokémon Trading Card Game's 5th ever set, named Team Rocket, released, and gave us the card Dark Vileplume. Unlike its predecessor in Jungle, this Vileplume carries a sinister expression. There is a wickedness across its face and reflected in its name. It is then appropriate that Vileplume's identity is that of a malevolent force in the game. The focus is the Pokemon power hay fever, and the first sentence of the effect which reads, "No trainer cards can be played." This type of effect is commonly referred to as trainer lock, or would be known as item lock in years to come. But how does impacting both players with an effect like this change things? After all, the crux of all of this is an effect. Let me use an analogy. Imagine two teams of people tasked with racing to carry a pile of objects up a mountain. One team has only 2 people, but they have equipment like backpacks, trekking shoes, and a map of the quickest route. The other team has twice as many people, but doesn't have any equipment. You might conclude that despite the lack of people, the more fully equipped first team might have the upper hand. In this analogy, the people are like the Pokemon, and equipment that each team might have is kind of like the trainer cards. So imagine if just as the race starts, all the competitors are told to leave their equipment behind. Suddenly, it becomes a question of which team is able to carry more with their bare hands, putting the ill-equipped but larger team ahead. It's kind of similar to the effect that Vileplume has on the game. It aims to remove the advantages the opponent might have, whilst accentuating its own. So, consider the stage that we've set. Trainer cards are incredibly powerful and form the core of the game's most powerful decks. Then all of a sudden Pokemon releases Vileplume, presenting a strategy which overturns these foundational cards and makes them functionally useless once Vileplume hits the board. Remembering the previous analogy, these Vileplume decks are already structured around a game state where trainer lock is in place. Suddenly your board can't be dismantled by energy removal or gust of wind, and the opponent can't guarantee access to the cards they require as soon as they need them, between cards like Computer Search, Item Finder, and Professor Oak being unplayable under Hay Fever lock. With all this being said, the next question is, how effective was the strategy at the time? Despite the sales pitch I just gave you, just as soon as a new flower begins to bud, it wasn't yet time for Vileplume to bloom. Dark Vileplume would soon give way to the infamous Neo Genesis Slowking, which offered a different take on Trainer Lock. Not to mention other counter-strategies in Pichu and Igglybuff from Neo Discovery. In hindsight, it's very plausible that Vileplume could have contended as a Tier 1 strategy, perhaps because the TCG players of today know what this kind of strategy is capable of when given a chance to grow. In time, this hay fever Pokemon power would continue to be explored in card designs across newer Vileplume cards, and even other Pokemon. The game's designers would continue to experiment by introducing new conditional versions of the same effect. These iterations would join and leave the modified format, just as a Rafflesia flower might spend many months as a bud. The idea that no trainer cards can be played also spent time as a budding strategy in the game. A blooming Rafflesia is rare to see with one's own eyes, as it only blooms for a very short span, no more than a week at most. This short bloom can pose a problem. Cross-pollination is difficult for a flower with such a short lifespan. It's not unlike the phenomenon seen in Pokemon cards. A card with an interesting idea may be printed, but may never find its footing due to a lack of adequate partners or an inhospitable environment. They say that life will find a way. One particular Vileplume did when we saw the bloom of Vileplume from Undaunted. The Heart Gold Soul Silver block of Pokemon cards are my personal favourite. Everything from the art to the design, it felt like cards which harkened back to an older way of playing the game. The release of new Pokemon SP ended with the last of the Platinum sets, and the newer cards in Heart Gold Soul Silver resembled a more traditional evolution approach. 2010's Majestic Dawn On format commenced, and the format was still being dominated by SP decks released during the Platinum era of the game. Particularly Luxchomp and Dialga-Chomp, which would continue to be mainstays of the format until their tumultuous rotation. These Haymaker-style strategies took advantage of very powerful trainer cards exclusive to them at the time, to outspeed and outpower the evolution decks of the format. Because of this focus on trainer cards, when a new Vileplume carrying an effect similar to Dark Vileplume released in Undaunted, two Vileplume strategies emerged in circumstances that felt right for Vileplume to bloom. Machamp SF was one such deck which, when supported by a Vileplume, could shut down the SP deck's speed and take out opposing SP Pokemon in one hit with their attack, appropriately named Takeout. Another was Gengar Stormfront, which, with the attack Poltergeist, would deal increasing amounts of damage based on the number of trainer cards in the opponent's hand, a number which would accumulate turn by turn due to the opposing player's inability to play trainer cards while Vileplume is in play. Each of these decks was supported by a couple of other important cards as well, each released in the Platinum Arceus set. Spiritomb AR would help assist in establishing a turn 1 Vileplume with its Darkness Grace attack, searching for Pokemon for free, while itself being capable of maintaining an immediate trainer lock through its Keystone Seal Pokebody. The other piece of the puzzle was the release of a stadium named Broken Time Space. This stadium allowed players to ignore the evolution rules and immediately play down and evolve Pokemon as soon as they had the cards in hand. Despite these powerful Vileplume archetypes, the SP decks were still able to pose a threat of their own. As opposed to the format when Dark Vileplume was first released, there were present threats to Vileplume and its pre-evolutions on the bench in the form of Pokemon like Luxray SP Level X and its Bright Look Pokemon power. You also had Garchomp SP Level X and its Dragon Rush attack, and even Pokemon like Blaziken SP, which could lure them to the active position and expose them to attacks. Moreover, the types of cards in the game had increased. Trainer cards now shared space with supporter cards and stadium cards, which are not locked by Vileplume. Between the speed and versatility of the SP decks and the Vileplume trainer lock strategies, there were no shortage of variety in the format. It was a magical era. Then, something happened. Only a 3-set rotation the year prior meant a very wide number of cards were in the format, and As the National Championship segment of the season approached, we saw the release of a new block of cards called Black and White, which brought with it new rules for Turn 1. Cards which were designed around a more restrictive Turn 1 were suddenly unleashed, and players demonstrated the way in which games could be reduced to winning on the first turn of the game. As a result, TPCI announced a mid-season rotation of cards, removing many older sets and leaving a very sparse card pool in its wake. After the mid-season rotation occurred, prior to US Nationals, the need for Vileplume seemed to disappear. You were no longer combating these hyper-aggressive SP decks, which had access to numerous strong item cards. Naturally, the focus shifted to a game with strong powers and abilities, supporting attackers. You had Magnabore with its overwhelming damage, draw power and energy acceleration. You had Yanmega Magnezone Kingdra with its efficient attacks, bench sniping, methodical approach. You had Stage 1s with their versatile attackers. You even had a turbo deck in the form of Zekrom, Pachirisu and Shaman, ZPS. The US National Championships occurred and seemed to enshrine Yanmega Prime as the deck to beat, setting the stage for the World Championship to come. On the Vileplume front, you saw a couple of interesting ideas emerge at the US National Championships, including Xander Perot's first place finish in juniors with Ursaring Prime and Vileplume. Whilst a couple of players, Christopher Orr and Austin Zettel, would finish in the top 16 of the Masters division with Mewbox, a deck which combines many Pokemon to use the right attack at the right time. The sudden mid-season rotation created a scenario where ideas about the best way to play the game were still fresh. An underexplored format is already a breeding ground for the game's deck builders to flourish, but having the World Championships be the next and final event of the season means there's nothing left to hide. This year, we would see one player in particular lay all their chips on the table and make one of the most legendary runs with a deck nobody saw coming. I think it'd be impossible to make a video about Vileplume without mentioning the legendary Ross Cawthon and his World Championship concoction he named the Truth. This deck represents the end result of what I've described. It was the culmination of a mid-season rotation, an unexplored format, and a tournament with the title of World Champion at stake. The strategy was unlike anything before it, and even after it to this day, facilitated largely by that all-important statement in Vileplume's Pokebody, Allergy Flower. Each player can't play trainer cards. Vileplume's ability to turn off items helped Ross facilitate a board which allowed him to perpetually remove damage from his active Pokemon. The active Pokemon would be one of several chosen to deal with different matchups. This board couldn't be disrupted by Pokemon Reversal, it couldn't be busted by Plus Power. It could take its time to set up and carefully advance its board state due to the slow pace created by Vileplume. Once completely set up, taking prizes against it became a gargantuan task, and almost always would be on the Vileplume player's terms. It was incredible. Ross's run was incredible. He made it all the way to the finals, where he would face a somewhat unfortunate matchup in Magnezone Emboar. Even so, Ross cemented his legacy that day, and Vileplume bloomed more beautifully than it ever had. In the season following, Vileplume would find new looks and partners before fading after the release of Next Destinies and eventually leaving the standard format.
Beauty fades. That is why it is beautiful.
The Rafflesia faces a tumultuous journey. This flower can take as long as 9 months to bloom. It rarely lives beyond being a bud, as they are often harvested to be sold. The few which do bloom rarely do so in circumstances which allow for cross-pollination. After no more than a week, the life of the flower ends and it begins to decompose. The Rafflesia is also known as the corpse flower. It emits a stench like a rotting meat. For the person beholding it, it is unpleasant, and yet the stench is there to attract insects to the flower, to help it reproduce. Even though it is repulsive to you and I, it does seem to attract a certain kind of creature. Likewise, Vileplume's signature effect of disallowing item cards can be repulsive to many. However, it can be attractive and compelling to others, even at its most maligned. After a period of time without it, Vileplume would return in 2015 in the Ancient Origins set. That trainer lock effect would now be known as item lock, as the previous use of the word trainer now acted as an umbrella term for cards like items, supporters, and stadiums. Vileplume didn't arrive alone. We also saw the printing of Forest of Giant Plants, which is perhaps fitting for the giant flower. Forest of Giant Plants enabled grass Pokemon to evolve immediately. This allowed Vileplume to present a turn 1 item lock and generally set up consistently as a stage 2 Pokemon. Out the gates, another Ancient Origins card looked to be the natural partner to Vileplume in Regice AOR. It would seem that the wonder of Vileplume Undaunted would be replaced by the frustration of multiple layers of control. Regice offered a means of walling EX Pokemon, a dominant force in the metagame. Carbink would offer a similar strategy too. Tyler Ninamura, a teammate of Ross Corthan's, would see success at the US National Championships piloting Carbink. This theme would carry on to other favoured partners as well. Giratina EX, Glaceon EX, Aegislash EX, and Jolteon EX would each carry different aspects of control suited for the overall strategy of Vileplume, of slowing down and walling opponents. Beyond the style of Vileplume in this era, there was also one other prevalent strategy which emerged prior to Sun and Moon, Vespiquen Vileplume. Standing apart from its contemporary strategies and even the ones before it, Vespiquen Vileplume was a deck that sought to very quickly set up Vileplume and Vespiquen, seeking to take KOs before an opponent could stage any kind of setup or counterplay. The last era of Standard which would see Vileplume represented would be the early moments of Sun and Moon, which saw the introduction of GX Pokemon. Decidueye GX is a Stage 2 Pokemon with the extra heft and stability needed to be successful. It would see success across several regionals and international championships. Rotation would occur shortly after Worlds, and the decomposition would almost be complete. Almost. In this era of the game, Pokemon has maintained two formats. Standard, which uses approximately the last 2 years or so worth of cards, and Expanded, which uses all the cards since the Black and White block, with a regularly reviewed ban list. In the Expanded format, Vileplume was still allowed to be used, however by this point, Forest of Giant Plants was banned. Now, there was a short span of time after the release of Sun and Moon and before Forest of Giant Plants was banned and expanded. A few players saw success pairing Vileplume with another Sun and Moon Grass GX, Lurantis GX. And if you cast your eyes to the top 8 of the 2017 Collinsville Regional Championship, wouldn't you know it? There's Ross Corthan wielding the Rafflesia-like Pokemon once again. Not to mention Azul also winning a regional championship in this format with the same archetype. Now, after Forest of Giant Plants was banned, Vileplume saw a few different partners which could work around the bans, such as Leafeon GX. Perhaps its most iconic partner in this era was Rowlet and Alolan Exeggutor, which could facilitate getting Vileplume into play quickly. Colton Day finished second at Collinsville with it in early 2020, prior to the suspension of the Pokemon competitive season. The year is now 2023, and after recommencing premier events, Pokemon is yet to signal intentions of continuing the expanded format. The flower is decomposed completely. Vileplume is dead. 2015 is the last time we've seen Vileplume printed with that iconic ability. Printings in the years since have carried the theme in different ways, but don't quite hit the mark in the same way. In Lost Origin, the newest Vileplume carries a conditional item lock, based on a coin flip. Interesting, but not the same. Not absolute. It's clear at this point that the Pokemon Company has decided that item lock needs to be more conditional, if at all. Items are rampant, HP is high, and anti-meta attackers are here. The game isn't conducive to Vileplume, or maybe its designers don't want to find out if it is. Maybe we'll never see Vileplume return in its most iconic form, but just like Joseph Arnold in 1818, I'm just glad I was able to see the flower bloom with my own eyes. Hello, or should I say Selamat Siang, which I believe is Indonesian for good day or a greeting similar to that. The Rafflesia is one of the national flowers of Indonesia and is a flower that's found in a few Southeast Asian countries, so I thought I would start with a salutation belonging to one of those countries. I want to thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. I spent a lot of time making this, and I sincerely hope you enjoyed this tale of Vileplume's identity in the Pokemon trading card game. I think that the history of Pokemon identity in the trading card game is super fascinating, and the limited time that we have with these cards in standard format makes it all the more meaningful. If you enjoyed this video, or would like to see me make more, I humbly request, consider subscribing. Even leaving me a comment below helps a ton and lets me know that you want to see more things like this. I'm Vice Games. I'll see you in the next live stream or video. So take care and goodbye. See you later.